Thanks for staying with us while we rearrange the set. For those of you coming into the room, please just come in and grab a chair. It's a really packed room for this panel discussion on sustainable procurement and supply chains, and that's little surprise. It is so important to everybody. We've got a cracking panel, and I have no intention of introducing them myself. I'm going to ask our panellists to introduce themselves in just 5 seconds. But just to say to you, we'll try and take questions throughout. If you want to ask a question, I will occasionally glance out into the room, put your hand up, and we'll get a microphone to you. If you're watching online, send your questions through on your screen there. It'll come straight to my iPad, and I'll try and relay them. So, Sustainable Procurement and Supply Chains, sponsored by GEP, this discussion. Can we go along the panel and just say who you are, what you are, and why?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Laith Amin. I'm with Eco Engineers, which is part of LRQA, and I lead growth and development for an organisation which helps companies to understand carbon intensities in their supply chain and get conformity in regulatory environments to access incentives and meet standards.
My name is Jacqueline Kaminsky, and I'm the head of sustainability at International Workplace Group. International Workplace Group is the largest provider of flexible workspaces. We own over 80% of the market, with over 5,000 locations globally.
Thank you, Emma.
Hello, lovely to be here today. I'm Emma Bleach. I am a group sustainability manager with Virgin Group, which is sort of like the head office where we have all of our brands working across with all of our different Virgin companies as well.
Craig?
Good morning, I'm Craig Woodburn. I'm Sustainability Director for Molson Coors Beverage Company. We have brands such as Carling and Madri and other brands as well. So I head up the team, work closely across our EMEA APAC group and set our strategy and approach.
Hi everyone, my name's Nishad More. I lead Sustainability Solutions for Europe for GEP. And for those of you who might have seen in the last session, GEP is a procurement and supply chain specialist. So we do strategy, consulting, services, and software for all things procurement and supply chain.
Okay, well, look, let's crack it into the meat of it. Sustainability in procurement and supply chains can mean anything. It can mean different things to different companies, certainly. Can we go through and just ask what that means to your company and making it relevant for people watching? What are the big issues maybe and how you're approaching it? Laith?
I think, it should mean many things. So within a given supply chain, oftentimes our mind sort of focuses on carbon intensity, and that is a very important and very challenging area to get control over, but there is so much to a supply chain when you think about the treatment of communities that are involved in the production of goods in a supply chain. The conformity to commitments around it might be modern slavery, it could be water use.
But what's in your in-tray today? What kept you awake last night?
Most of what is in there is organisations who are looking at upcoming regulatory developments like the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism or Californian SB 253, which are basically saying it's time to get serious about collecting data and disclosing your Scope 3 emissions information. And these organisations are grappling with how are we going to do that, and probably more importantly, how do we collect data that we've got trust in and can make a confident disclosure and use as a baseline to perform improvements in the future. Those are the real challenges there.
Thank you. You've set the scene for what I hope will be much of this discussion. Jacqueline?
Yes, I think sustainable procurement means different things to different people in different parts of their journey. For us, it very much means ensuring that our purchasing decisions are focused on beyond just financials. We're focused on embedding and ensuring we're thinking through the lens of social and environmental aspects as we're thinking about the products that we're going to be and services that we're going to be purchasing from our suppliers.
What's worrying Mr. Branson and Co?
What is it at the moment? I think we're really lucky as Virgin because we've been built on purpose, and our purpose is all about changing business for good. And that also comes through when we talk about procurement. So we're actually starting to talk about purposeful procurement. And similar to yourself, it's what is that beyond just cost alone? How can we shift from value saving to value creating? What does that look like, not just with our purpose, but across sustainability, including the social, which I think sometimes is forgotten, but also with the belonging piece as well and DEI. So it's all about making more purposeful decisions, and if it is just focused on cost.
Are you genuinely changing the way you procure stuff throughout? Rather than looking at cost?
Absolutely. I think it's not something...
Sorry, that was a rotten question, but it's worth asking.
I mean, no. I think challenge is really good and important, and I think it's something that really keeps me working where I am. Is that it's not just words that we say. It's there to inspire, but then what are the metrics behind them? How are we actually showing how we're changing business for good? How are we showing that we are being purposeful in our decision making? So I think we've got the data as well to say this is what we're doing about it.
Craig, I don't particularly want to pay more for my beer. So what's in your in tray, and how are you helping me out?
I mean, we have in our strategy create a world to celebrate as one of our ambitions. So we reflect that in all the things we do from our procurement approaches, but across the business. So people recognise that internally, and then we can hinge lots of our topics, ambitions around that, and celebrate in that way. So I guess procurement are on that journey where you're working with a lot of individuals, and they're having to change their knowledge, awareness and education as well. So that's the internal steps we're having to take to educate people to look and ask the right questions, but then interpret the responses. But then we're working with our suppliers. We work with our farmers, for example. We worked with them since about 2008. And whilst they're one step removed directly from us, we work closely to understand and embed opportunities in sustainability with them. And then, as I say, more sustainable procurement is contractual obligations. So building that longer term lens and view with a lot of our suppliers to work with them consistently.
Nishad, can you help us move into territory that Laith raised, which is data? I mean, it's the building block. It's obvious. It's the building block of everything. Good data and leveraging it properly.
Yeah.
What makes it so hard?
Well, so I think at GEP, we've been doing procurement and supply chain work for quite a long time now, and what we're finding is more and more there's an intersection between procurement and supply chain and sustainability. And the procurement function or the supply chain function are being looked at to unlock that sustainability value, because we're realizing how much of that sustainability value actually lies in procurement and supply chain. And when it comes to data, the challenge, of course, is that we're very used to working with financial data. All of our systems, as Darren was saying earlier, are built for the data that we're all very used to and very comfortable with. And there's an expectation that we are now, essentially overnight going to be able to produce a similar level of data quality with sustainability data, which is not only very difficult, in many cases for many of our clients is simply impossible. And so what we try to frame the data question as is a journey, that you have to start with what you're able to do. So in the case of carbon emissions, scope 3 mapping, you might want to start, for example, with a spend-based model, because your spend data is the data that you might be very comfortable with from a procurement perspective, and it might be the data that is most readily available and the most mature data you have. It may not be possible for you to move to material flow analysis, or for you to move to volume-based data or more complex emissions factors for the next 2 to 3 years. And I think understanding what that journey needs to look like, where you are now, and sort of accepting that and getting your senior stakeholders to buy into that, and where you want to get to, and mapping that journey out for yourself is what we try to show our clients, and is really that journey.
Panel, fight it out. What issues have you got with data? What insights can you offer?
I think one challenge that I would highlight is, if we're looking at those early disclosure activities, like how do we get ourselves in a position to disclose embedded supply chain emissions type of question. The normative emissions factors that are starting to come out from the regulators, they're set high. So, if you're using like a top-down approach, like a generic software platform, and you're starting from the regulator-provided emissions factor, you're going to be at a pretty high level, and it's being done quite probably intentionally, because what the regulators want us to do is to start collecting data from our supply chains that's based on actuals. And in order to be, they're setting up an incentive to be able to reduce our carbon intensity number. So I think what Nishad is saying is right. Get yourself in a position to disclose in year one, but concurrently start building the protocols and the plans, and start doing the supply chain engagement back in your supply chain that you'll need to have in place to collect bottom-up data that's operational, because that'll probably give you a lower number, and it'll give you a much higher confidence in your disclosure and set you up to be able to make reductions in your carbon intensity over time. It's a good time to start, planning for that future environment.
I think from my perspective, there's a bigger problem here, and it's really centers around the lack of standardization. I think, and that's really slowing down data in this space. I mean, we sit in a really interesting position where we're also service loads of different clients who are requesting data from us. And, there are people in this room today who spend the majority of their time on my team filling out reporting, as, many of us do. And the fact that there isn't this standardization, there isn't a kind of commonly used template, there is a whole load of wasted time that is being spent, which is slowing down progress as well. I also think that as we at IWG are building out our supply chain strategies, we're looking for those types of tools, so using AI and so forth, to help with that wider standardization problem that's happening, and that wider burden that is slowing down overall progress. And I think at the end of the day, you can't change what you can't measure, what you can't see. And I think this is a wider kind of industry problem, which is everyone's asking for the same types of information, but yet that lack of standardization is not here yet, which is just causing a wider problem for us all.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. It's one of the things that we see so much. I think the journey piece is so important, not just understanding where you are, but also the suppliers and the partners you want to work with. It's having those honest conversations to say, do you have carbon emissions that you can provide? What does that look like? And particularly if you were wanting to diversify our supply chains, whether that's with more small, medium companies, they might not potentially have the resources, it might be a team of 20. How are they going to be able to provide all the information we're asking for? So I think understanding that journey and reducing the burden on the requests that we're putting in. I think there's all these different systems that ask for the data, but also how can we just have more human-to-human conversations to say, where are you? If they're more advanced, maybe they can help us. But how can we also help other organisations as well on that journey? So I think that piece around collaboration is something that we don't necessarily always think about when we're talking about data collection, because it's data for me and what I'm reporting, what I'm disclosing, rather than actually what's that value chain data piece look like and how can we help each other out.
I want to drill into partnership and collaboration in just a mo. I'm thinking it must be difficult, Craig, to pick up data from your end suppliers. Maybe they're huge farming conglomerates, I don't know. But at the end of the day, you are depending entirely on natural resources for your products, aren't you?
Yeah, and I think I was going to touch upon the difference in markets and the difference in drivers as well. I guess because of the remit of my scope, EMEA APAC, the speed at which suppliers are engaging in those commitments around net zero activities, understanding the intensity of the products that they're supplying to us varies, as does the country they're in and the legislative drivers that are pushing them to do that. So I guess when I look across the whole sphere of sustainability ambitions, I've got a balance where we can target and make progress whilst making assumptions around those markets that not behind, but we can share the knowledge and learn and bring them up quicker, because that's where we're trying to support and educate them, as well as get some consistency in the approach of data that helps everybody. Because I think, that's drive for data for clarity. There's so many different variations, and we're obviously a supplier to our customers, and we see so many different types of requests coming from them for the same sort of information. So we can understand it from both perspectives. So we're trying to make it consistent, but balance that with knowledge, awareness, and the drive from different continents, different countries in terms of ambitions as well. So yeah, it is really complex in terms of how you balance it and how you prioritise the activity with generally relatively small teams of sustainability people.
Are there any particular either themes or even nuggets of advice that you draw out from your experience that you would share to improve and advise, if we dare, other companies out there?
I think it centers on what you had just said a few minutes ago about this collaboration, and Emma had said this as well. I think that it's very easy for organizations to come into building a sustainable procurement or a supply chain engagement strategy with compliance and financials in mind. But actually, if you take a step back and analyze those companies who are really progressing on their sustainability journeys and really meeting their targets on an annual basis, it's those that are really embedding collaboration at the heart of their business. It's those that are working with their supply chains and incorporating their feedback. They're not creating a one-size-fits-all type of approach and expecting everybody to align to that. They are creating incentives. They're building education programs. And they're very clear about measurement and targets and using that to also create friendly competition. They're benchmarking their peers and sharing that information. I think it's all about transparency in collaboration, and I would encourage those they're early on in their journeys to really focus on understanding that aspect, understanding those insights, and taking those into embedding those insights into your kind of the strategies that you're building.
Mm-hmm. I'll just add, I think, Emma, your point around the standardization of methodologies and of data doesn't just need to take place internally in your organization, but also in your suppliers, right? Because if you have a certain framework that you're expecting data from your suppliers on, you need to make sure that they can actually provide you that data in that framework, because another customer of theirs, and many of your suppliers will have multiple customers, could be asking for a completely different framework, be using a different tool, different data points. I think what we're seeing is that is changing, and it's changing slowly but surely. There's plenty of software out there, some of whom are in the other room now, who are we're having really good conversations with some of our partners and some of our clients about how we are reaching that standardization. And it may not be standardized across the world or across every organization, but it is at least sector based for now. Mm-hmm. So you might find that a supplier who is supplying to 3 or 4 big manufacturing organizations or big consumer goods organizations knows what they're expecting and is then able to provide the data that they're expecting. So, for example, the PACT methodology is really helpful for a lot of suppliers. A lot of organizations are really backing that and subscribing to that. And it also allows, there's software and tools that allow smaller suppliers to learn how they need to produce the data that they're expected to produce. So I think it's changing.
Yeah, and I think on that point as well, it's not just collaboration up your own value chain, it is that sectoral approach. How can you even work with competitors to say, how can we share information or the load? I think it's the JAC, the Joint Alliance for Corporate Social Responsibility, who do auditing of different supply chains in the telecom sector. So rather than all the different organisations saying, right, let's all go out and we've all got the, it might be the same suppliers for 4 different businesses, they only do it once and then they share the information. So where allowed, how can we be sharing and thinking more in systems rather than more individual businesses as well? Yeah.
I would just maybe add to all these great points that, building those protocols to be able to standardize the data that's being captured, which is really about, measurement, reporting and verification of good quality data. I think where we've seen it be really successful is when you can go into the producing, supplying organizations in that value chain and ask them how the data can be collected in a way that makes sense to them operationally. Sure. So, we did a very interesting project with a dairy co-op in Wisconsin, actually, where we set out a monitoring, reporting, verification protocol for decarbonising dairy supply chains. And it was really the farmers who knew how you could measure, for things like cover cropping or, all the other ways in which carbon reduction can happen on the farm. The farmers know how that data can be best measured and how it can be the data can be gathered most practically. So just doing the grassroots engagement, it does get you a plan that will get you better compliance and conformity.
I think that story is a perfect illustration, isn't it, of the need of not a top-down approach of the collaboration piece. I was reading a sustainability report from a very significant global company last night. And they are absolutely, without any question, way down on their journey towards net zero. They are doing stuff. And even one of their reports, very recent reports, said, and I quote, "Scope 3 reporting is often incomplete and inconsistent." And that's one of the big boys and girls in the game. And they have the muscle and the heft to do perhaps more than other people. So, comments, advice from the panel?
Well, firstly, I love the idea that reading a sustainability report is your bedtime reading. I think that's
how sad.
I think sometimes we have to be kinder to ourselves when we think about Scope 3. If we think about targets that have been set and regulation that's come in, it's really been focused on Scope 1 and 2 for the past 5-10 years.
Well, exactly, yeah.
Scope 3 is something that's still, coming in now, and I think rather than us I think it's all about honesty and building trust. So rather than us saying, we've mapped out all of our Scope 3, we know what it is, giving figures that are massively inflated, I think we're allowed to have some time to say, how are we doing this and building this in the right way? And I think what can sometimes get lost when we talk about data is we lose the humanity and the people aspects. There's people running their businesses, there's people trying to find the natural resources and manage them to create the products in the first place. So I think with Scope 3, naturally, it's going to take longer. And I think we're allowed to I know we've got to move at pace, but I think we shouldn't assume that we should be there already. We're still working towards, Scope 1 and 2 targets for 2030. How are we progressing on the Scope 3 journey? For sure. But also, I don't think organisations should be penalised, wherever they are, for not necessarily having mapped out all of their Scope 3 yet.
Yeah.
And I would add to Emma's comment by saying that absolute agreement. But I would also say that a reason for kind of a lack of progress here, it comes down to also just a lack of education within the space amongst a lot of our suppliers. As Emma said, we've it's Scope 1 and Scope 2 has been much more socialized with our suppliers. And when we started to speak to our suppliers, we've realized that most of them just don't even understand what Scope 3 is. Sometimes I get confused what Scope 3 is, and I'm in this space. And so I think that it definitely comes down from a timing standpoint, as Emma had said, but also I think that progress is also dependent on training. And I think organizations have a degree of responsibility in ensuring that their suppliers understand what that means. And until that happens, there isn't going to be that progress that is made in Scope 3.
I think from our point of view, I guess we've got a relatively, whilst it can be complex, relatively straightforward supply chain, but we do have to look down the depth of that, like you said, back to the farmers. And I think in terms of complexity of Scope 3, we're asked a lot for our products, our carbon footprint of our products, or our life cycle assessment of our products, so that customers can then put that into their trajectories and see how they're performing as a component of what they're buying, whether it would be hospitality, restaurants, all sorts of pubs and chains who are looking at our product impact. So we'll provide a number with the knowledge we've got and the basis of the information we've got, that then they're using straight to put into their trajectory and say, okay, well, we're now on track for our commitment to meet net zero by 2040, 2045, 2050, whatever. But what we're providing, because we're all still on that journey of understanding, getting clarity on the detail of Scope 3, I'll give it one day. The next day, we might have got some more information that helps us mature and improve it further, or find something that's made it slightly worse. And I think that's the challenge, is whatever we're providing, we're all on that journey, and it's recognising that the data is still improving and being validated. and it can't be written down in a tablet of stone that this is what it is and this is what it's going to stay like. So it's an important balance.
Yeah, I think being in sustainable procurement, I mean, I think for us, Scope 3 is our bread and butter. I mean, we almost don't, pretty much don't talk to our clients about Scope 1 and 2 at all. So I think there's two important points to mention with Scope 3. The first one is, I think there's a bit of a misconception sometimes where we try to outsmart our suppliers, where we try to show them what their value chain is, or try to map it out for them and say, I know where in your value chain you are, your emissions hotspots are, for example. I think what's always important with Scope 3 is to begin that conversation with the supplier. I've done projects where we've done a top-down analysis of what value chains are from consumer goods suppliers, for example, in chemicals or in foods. And we've shown that to the supplier and ended up being completely wrong. Because every supplier in every geography, in the particular way that they do their operations and who they sell to, will be very different. So I think it's important to start with that supplier conversation, and as you said, Emma, to understand, what are their constraints, what are their challenges, and where are they actually doing quite well. I think the second mistake we make with Scope 3 is we get too wrapped up in the data question. We get too caught up and tie ourselves up in knots with LCAs, for example, and really wanting to arrive at that perfect number and say, I've dotted all my I's and crossed all my T's, and I've missed out nothing, and this is the kind of holy grail of what my Scope 3 is, and that's what I'm going to put in my report. But from a procurement standpoint, it's important to remember that the purpose of doing all of this work and arriving at your Scope 3 baseline and understanding which supplier has higher emissions or lower emissions is to support your procurement decisions, is so that your stakeholders in the business are confident that you're giving them the best strategy for sustainable procurement, where to buy from, what to buy, and who to buy from. And I think a lot of that decision making can rely on directional data, on sort of higher level than we think data or evidence in the value chain that, again, can start with those supplier conversations. So I think we tend to go too deep too quickly, and then kind of forget what the objective is, which is to support our decision making. So that's what we always encourage our clients to think about, is the bigger picture.
I want to take some questions in just one sec, but just as you were talking, Nishad, from your global helicopter perspective, what do you see within companies? No names, no pack drill. Do you see sustainability as a separate department or as integrated within procurement and supply chain teams?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think I'm going to give the standard consulting answer of it depends. Because I think smaller organizations are very much coming to terms with sustainability. So they might hire a sustainability manager, they might have a team of 2 or 3 who are looking at sustainability across the board. And part of that role will be procurement, right? More mature organizations will have sustainable procurement roles that sit within procurement and report up to the chief procurement officer or the chief supply chain officer. I think regardless of what that team setup looks like, what's becoming clear is that there is a higher expectation on procurement to deliver sustainability goals and to deliver on those targets. And that is the case regardless of the size of the organization and regardless of what sector or business you're in. Because I think sustainability is, and I was sitting in a panel yesterday and it was said, which I completely agree with, sustainability is starting to be seen as just another function. And it's a function that cannot survive on its own. It relies on that cross-functional collaboration and on other functions, including procurement, meeting the expectations. And for it to be taken seriously, I think sustainability needs to be setting out those expectations from other functions, including procurement, and making sure that buy-in is there and that accountability is there to say, actually, this goal, even though it's a sustainability goal, is now being owned by my procurement function. And this is now their target. It's part of their OKRs or KPIs, and not sustainability's targets because they can't deliver it on their own.
I know I want to take questions, but any experiences or confessions from the panel before we do?
I would say that we're at a point of quite a transformational point within our business, and that comes off the back of delivering our net zero transition plan. So it's the first time in the where the organization had we've had very clear targets for all of our different departments, including all the categories associated to procurement. So for the very first time, the procurement leads and heads are starting to see the targets that they have to meet on an annual basis, and also they're starting to understand that we need to report this, and the board is looking over this. So there's a real kind of a moment happening within our business where people are starting to realize that those objectives and key results don't just sit on us as a sustainability team, but in fact, everybody will have a sustainability objective coming up in 2026 that they have to meet upon. And I think it's taken us until this moment to really start to see that shift across the business, where that accountability is starting to sit on different department leads, and also where, I think the business is just starting to think about sustainability in a very different way.
I'm just wondering, in a few years' time, will you even have a sustainability team? Maybe you'll just have one chief sustainability officer, and the function is just simply embedded in every team.
I think that's the future, but definitely the future hope for. I mean, I hope that I think there'll always be some degree of a department that is overseeing that, but I think
you'll be the CSO, so it's okay.
Yes, exactly. But I do think there needs to be that kind of spread of accountability, and we're already starting to see that in certain areas in the business. So we are committed to RE100, so we need to have 100% renewable energy across 5,000 locations globally. So it's just a small task. And it's not cost effective to rely on just purchasing REC. So we are looking at really delivering a whole energy strategy and partnering with landlords globally to actually put on site into all those locations. In order to do that, there's a heavy reliance on procurement from an energy standpoint. So for the very first time, just this year, we hired a sustainability kind of energy lead that's helping with that, and they sit within the procurement team. So we're already seeing a bit of our web starting to start to
the tentacles go.
Yes, exactly. Our tentacles moving into different departments, and the organization, our COO, is starting to see the benefit of that. So having that is a case study that's been very effective. It's been very helpful for us to kind of drive that transformation. But yes, I think the future goal, in my opinion, would be to have this kind of dual reporting across different departments within the organization, where they're reporting into me from a sustainability standpoint, but also their department.
And I completely agree. I think the risk that we have when sustainability is a separate department is other team members think it's just for them to solve. And so we really talk about how can the decisions we be making be part of everybody's everyday action. So there's that spread level of accountability. And I would disagree, thinking in the future, hopefully we don't even have chief sustainability officers. Hopefully the legal teams and the COO and everybody is just so embedded with what sustainability is and the long-term thinking that actually sustainability is just inherently part of business. We're definitely not there yet, and I think it's one of these processes of trying to get that buy-in and trying to get people to see that sometimes it's not sustainability, it's just operational business, and it happens to be under that title is something that's definitely coming in. But it's even events like this. I don't know if I'm allowed to do this, but if people put their hands up who don't work in sustainability, is there anybody who doesn't work in sustainability as part of their title here?
Consultants.
A few. But, even events like this at the moment where we're trying to solve and change are attended by sustainability people. So when are we going to get the chief financial officers turning up? When are we going to get all these other different team members showing up to realise events such as this is so important and core to the business that they do inherently, that we're all coming on that journey together, and it's not just for sustainability.
At Procurement and Supply Chain live here in 2 weeks' time, that's where. And we'll get it sorted. Any questions? I can, Kendra, I'll run across the camera shot. And
Hi, thank you. It's a great panel. I'm Isabel Devon from the Carbon Trust. I just wanted to ask a question more of the brands, perhaps, because one of the challenges that you've described of getting the supply chain to actually collaborate to deliver, usually some of my clients address that through trade bodies and others, or groups like Manufacture 2030, or Supply Chain School, for example, for construction. I mean, would the brands say that there is support from the bodies that can actually help your supply chains help with that? Because it can't just be an effort that you make with your competitors and your collaborators, right? I mean, is there something you can share that helps me with my other clients?
Yeah, I mean, we work with their trade bodies, so generally whichever country we're in, we'll work closely with them. Obviously, you've got anti-competitive rules, so you have to be careful around how you do that. But in terms of learnings from a sustainability point of view, often we can do that. And I think goes beyond just sustainability reporting and engagement. It's obviously around legislative drivers and awareness and interpretation as well. And so if we look at the EU as an example with Omnibus and challenges around that, and EU deforestation regs and CBAM, so a lot of that interpretation, that's where those trade bodies can help us work to come up with actually what's our plan as a collective to try and respond to them and how we can collect data consistently. But yeah, depending on platforms that people have already get, sometimes it's bolt-ons to those platforms, or sometimes you've got to go out with a separate questionnaire, which, as we already highlighted, becomes a challenge.
There was a hand up, a gentleman over here, Kendra, if you're able to run down.
Hi, thank you. I'm Mark from NatCap. We're a nature intelligence company. The talk so far has all been about impacts and regulation and net zero. And what I haven't heard is risk or resilience. And so I'd love to hear how you approach that subject with suppliers and whether that's a helpful incentive to get them to act, especially for companies like Molson Coors, where I expect physical risk to be really important. Thank you.
Yeah, want me to pick that? So I was going to add, when we were talking around removing the sustainability team, I think a lot of where we work, I guess, collectively, whilst we want to embed it and work within the business fundamentally in those functions, we still need a second line of defence within a business and identifying those risks. I think that you'll always have some specialist needed to be able to link in, and whether that's part of the governance team and ethics and compliance team to look at that points that you're raising. Obviously, we've got reporting on climate adaptation. That comes into risk because of business-related concerns and the continuity of a business, whether that be your agricultural suppliers being impacted because climate change means barley can't be grown locally in the UK, to hops availability, but then to logistics and siting of our facilities and breweries where they might be located in at-risk locations where water might not be available. So I think you're right to raise risk, and I think, as I say, my integration, I guess, conflicting with what we said here, would be where ultimately we probably still have some of those team members to help us that second line of defence, to provide the specialist knowledge that is still going to be needed even if we've got topics embedded across the business.
There's another hand up. 3 hands up. One of those 2 gentlemen there, Ken, you choose. Yeah, paper beats rock, always.
Indeed. Thank you. I'm Ian from SEDEX. I'm delighted that Molson Coors is actually one of our customers. So, but we've never met. So maybe we should have a chat later on. We do with your US colleagues. I share the challenge that you mentioned about suppliers, in that we have an outreach program for our customers to get to the suppliers, get to their suppliers, so that we can run our sort of quality control audits and things like that. And it is a challenge getting. The biggest challenge is actually the procurement team, which you mentioned earlier on, in that the procurement team don't seem to be really engaged or interested. So I was interested to hear that you sort of seem to share those challenges. But one of the things that interests me is we talked a lot about the farmers, the growers, the manufacturers. Now we have, we also look at what we call the service provider, which could actually be the cleaning company or the energy provider. And I'm just wondering how many of the panel actually look at those types of suppliers as well as what I would call the traditional things that we look at, which is things like, okay, we've got to look at have the farmers got or the workers in the factory got access to water? Do they have good breaks? Do they have a living wage? What about the what we call the service providers? I'll ask that to everybody.
I can probably comment to that. So the majority of our suppliers at International Workplace Group are service providers, so the cleaners, the painters, maintenance people, and they make up the majority of our supply chain. Of course, we have very large global suppliers. We are, for example, the #1 furniture purchaser in the world, which that was a very interesting stat. But we have these big providers that understand this space. But the majority of our suppliers do center on the kind of service aspect. And what we're just starting to learn, and we're in the process of launching our revamped supplier engagement program in 2026, when starting to speak to those suppliers, is that, and I mentioned this a little bit earlier on, is they don't have a deep understanding of this space. And of course, there's lack of capabilities, lack of resource, but a big part of that starts with just lack of understanding. And that's with Scope 1 and Scope 2 as well. I know I mentioned earlier that we're a little bit beyond Scope 1 and Scope 2 with some suppliers, and but I would say they still have a hard time understanding that as well. So for us, we're in the process of piloting a supply chain engagement program where we're incorporating those types of service providers to understand what we can build that is suitable for them in the future. And we've also tiered our suppliers, of course, to think about at what phase do we need them to start to deliver on what we need them to deliver on. But it's no doubt a challenge. And I think that it also comes back to kind of cross-sector collaboration. I think I'm definitely guilty of it because of time and resource, and it's much easier to focus on what I need to deliver on for our business and against our targets. But what I know I would benefit on, and where I think that the wider industry would, is to share that information. And I find it even in my position, find it quite difficult to be able to find those opportunities in those moments to gather that type of information, to understand from those organizations that are working with service providers what has worked for them. Beyond working with consultants and so forth, I still think that we're missing that kind of collaboration. And if we had more of that, we would be able to progress quicker.
In this setting, the most rare commodity is time, and we are out of it. I do apologise if you had any further questions on panel. If you wanted to jump in there, it is my job as the host to call this to a halt. Thank you very much indeed. I know we've not gone anywhere near down various parts of territory that we could and should have done, but we have addressed risk, improved collaboration, we've improved data collection and leverage, and we've removed sustainability teams in the space of 45 minutes or so that's not bad. There are 2 workshops which may be of interest. 11:45, Sustainable Logistics is a Strategic Necessity with DP World in room 1, and Closing the Gap Between Sustainability, Ambition and Action with Kindrill in room 2, and it's also time for a tea break. So what's not to love? Thank you for your time. We're back in 20 minutes.